Berlin, early morning 1940. Hitler's office in the Reich Chancellery was quiet, almost deceptively calm. The papers on his desk were neat, reports aligned in perfect order, the map of Europe spread out before him. He had been preparing for months, coordinating strategies across the continent, ensuring that every move of the Wehrmacht and Luftwaffe advanced the Reich's objectives. But that morning, the calm was shattered. A message arrived that would ignite fury, disbelief, and bitter contempt in equal measure. Mussolini had invaded Greece, without informing Hitler, without coordination, without regard for Germany's broader strategic position. The Italian army had crossed the border, moving into mountainous terrain that was ill-suited to their logistics, poorly equipped, and unprepared for the determined Greek resistance. Hitler read the reports with growing incredulity, his eyes narrowing, jaw tightening, and fingers drumming impatiently on the desk. He summoned his closest generals immediately. The room filled with the heavy scent of tobacco, the tension thick. Maps were unfurled, markers tracing Italian movements, Greek defensive positions, and potential German response strategies. Hitler's voice, when he spoke, was sharp, controlled, yet laced with visible anger. Mussolini has acted without consultation, without permission, without sense. Do you understand what this means? The generals nodded, subdued, sensing the gravity of both the breach in protocol and the strategic complication. Germany's forces were already stretched, engaged on multiple fronts, preparing for the campaigns in France and elsewhere. The Italian blunder threatened to force Germany into a diversion it did not want, stretching manpower and resources at the worst possible moment. Hitler picked up the phone. His voice was icy as he barked orders to the Italian high command, demanding explanations. Mussolini's aides fumbled, offering reassurances that the operation was under control, that Greek resistance would crumble, that the invasion would succeed. Hitler's patience, already frayed, snapped. You act without my knowledge, without coordination, and expect me to ignore it. Do you believe Germany exists to clean up your failures? The phone line crackled, brief pauses, and stammered responses. Hitler's contempt was palpable. He did not merely see the military implications. He understood the political consequences, the undermining of trust between allies, and the dangerous precedent Mussolini's recklessness set. He had relied on his Italian partner, yet this unilateral action threatened to force Germany into a campaign in the Balkans, a region of unforgiving mountains, harsh winters, and determined enemies. Reports kept arriving. Greek forces had mobilized swiftly, using the terrain to their advantage, inflicting unexpected losses on Italian divisions. Morale among Italian troops was low, supply lines were overstretched, and the Luftwaffe, though nearby, could not intervene without German orders. Every telegram that reached Berlin deepened Hitler's frustration, disbelief, and the urgency of corrective measures. Mussolini's gamble had become Germany's problem. Hitler convened an emergency briefing with his generals, mapping out possible interventions. Every scenario carried risk. Every delay could allow the Greeks to fortify, prolonging the campaign and consuming German resources at a time when focus was required elsewhere. Hitler's mind worked rapidly, calculating troop movements, air support, and the minimal forces that could stabilize the Italian front without compromising broader objectives. Yet beneath the calculations simmered fury. Mussolini's hubris, his carelessness, and his expectation that Hitler would compensate for Italy's failures were intolerable. In private meetings, Hitler's language grew sharper. Reports of Italian mismanagement, poorly executed offensives, and logistical failures were met with disbelief. How can one act so recklessly, to jeopardize not only your troops, but our strategic plans? To drag us into an unnecessary front? The generals, familiar with Hitler's temper yet cautious in response, explained potential interventions. German forces could be diverted to assist in northern Greece, perhaps stabilizing the front. Luftwaffe support could target Greek positions, providing cover for the Italians. Each option required careful timing, coordination, and resources, yet all were reactions to a campaign Mussolini had launched unilaterally. Hitler spent hours reviewing intelligence reports, maps, and dispatches. Each update deepened his disgust. Mussolini's forces were struggling, yet there was no sign of retreat or acknowledgement of error from the Italian side. The invasion of Greece, intended as a demonstration of power, had become a liability, threatening Germany's broader objectives in World War II. The notion that allies could act independently, without consultation or consequence, was intolerable in Hitler's eyes. By afternoon, Hitler summoned additional generals and senior officers for a full assessment. The room was tense, the air thick with smoke and urgency. Charts, maps, and markers covered every surface. Hitler's voice, measured but laced with anger, cut through the room. This is not merely a mistake. This is a betrayal of strategy, a failure of discipline. Mussolini assumes we exist to clean up his errors. He will learn what such recklessness costs. The generals remained silent, noting positions and calculating interventions. Every measure considered was reactive. The campaign in Greece had created a ripple effect, requiring German attention, yet offering no advantage. Hitler's fury was not only about the military disruption. It was about control, about authority, and about the principle that unilateral action by an ally could not be tolerated. Reports from the front lines continued to arrive, detailing Italian struggles against Greek resistance. Supply lines disrupted, columns halted by terrain and determined defenders, aircraft support limited and uncoordinated. Every detail fueled Hitler's contempt. Mussolini had acted without foresight, without preparation, and without consideration for the broader consequences. The invasion was not only tactically flawed, it was politically reckless. Hitler dictated a series of orders, aiming to stabilize the situation without full commitment of German resources. Limited forces were to move toward northern Greece, Luftwaffe squadrons allocated to reconnaissance and close support, and intelligence missions intensified. Every order was precise, calculated, and unyielding. Yet even as measures were enacted, the personal anger simmered. Mussolini's blunder had forced Hitler into reactive measures, consuming time, resources, and focus at the worst possible moment. As evening approached, Hitler reviewed the cumulative reports once more. The Italian front in Greece remained unstable, Greek forces resilient, and Mussolini's troops disorganized. The potential for escalation loomed. A protracted campaign could draw Germany further into the Balkans, complicating operations elsewhere. Hitler's mind raced through options, contingencies, and the political repercussions of intervention. Beneath the calculations lay an undeniable emotional response: fury at betrayal, disbelief at incompetence, and contempt for Mussolini's arrogance. Late at night, Hitler spoke to a confidant, his voice low but sharp. This is not strategy. This is recklessness masquerading as initiative. He acts without consultation, assuming the Reich will bail him out. And now our forces must divert at the worst possible moment. He will learn that such mistakes carry consequences. The words, though private, captured the full spectrum of his response: the emotional shock, the rational assessment of the danger, and the determination to correct the blunder. Mussolini's campaign in Greece had created a crisis that demanded immediate, calculated action, yet also tested Hitler's patience and trust in his closest ally. By midnight, Germany's initial responses were underway. Troop movements toward northern Greece were coordinated. Luftwaffe reconnaissance flights mapped Greek positions, and contingency plans for full intervention were drafted. Hitler's fury remained, tempered by the need for precision and discipline. Mussolini had created chaos, yet the Reich had to act decisively to contain the fallout. Disbelief, contempt, and urgency shaped every decision, highlighting the cost of uncoordinated aggression in the theater of World War II. The following morning in Berlin, the Reich Chancellery was tense with urgency. Hitler had barely slept, reviewing intelligence reports, telegrams from generals in the Balkans, and updates from Italian command. Mussolini's campaign had not slowed. Greek forces, familiar with their mountainous terrain, had launched effective counterattacks, halting Italian advances and inflicting heavy losses. Every report deepened Hitler's disbelief and sharpened his fury. He convened another emergency briefing. Generals and staff officers gathered, maps sprawled across tables, pins marking Italian positions, Greek strongholds, and potential avenues for German intervention. Hitler's voice, though measured, was sharp and cutting. Mussolini has demonstrated incompetence. His arrogance, his disregard for strategy, has created a liability. Do you see what this means? Germany is being drawn into a front we are not prepared for. The room was silent, officers avoiding eye contact with one another. The reality of the situation was stark. The Balkan front, previously peripheral in strategic planning, had now become a pressing issue. Hitler's fury was both personal and professional. He had relied on Mussolini as a partner, yet this unilateral campaign threatened not only military objectives, but the credibility of the Axis alliance. Reports from the front painted a grim picture. Italian divisions were stalled in mountainous passes, supply lines overextended, and morale low. Greek troops, using the terrain to their advantage, ambushed convoys and cut communication lines. The Luftwaffe had been called in for reconnaissance, but the rugged terrain limited its effectiveness. Hitler read each telegram with growing contempt. Mussolini had acted recklessly, ignoring the complexity of Greece's geography, the determination of its forces, and the consequences for Germany's broader war plans. Hitler summoned communications officers and personally dictated urgent messages to Rome. His tone was icy precise, but laced with unmistakable fury. You must explain immediately why such a reckless campaign was launched without consulting your ally. German forces are stretched, our plans disrupted, and your army is at risk. This will not be tolerated. Replies from Mussolini's aides attempted to downplay the disaster, stressing the heroism of Italian troops and the expected swift victory. Hitler's response was cutting, almost venomous. Heroism is meaningless if it endangers the Reich. You gamble with our forces as though my consent is irrelevant. You will learn that such errors have consequences. As the morning passed, Hitler reviewed contingency plans. Limited German forces could be dispatched to stabilize the front, but any intervention risked diverting critical units from preparations elsewhere in Europe. The generals provided assessments. Divisions in northern Greece could reinforce Italian lines. The Luftwaffe could target Greek positions for support, and intelligence missions could help identify weak points. Every recommendation was carefully weighed, but the necessity of action was inescapable. Hitler's mind, sharp and relentless, considered multiple scenarios. If Italian forces failed completely, Greece could become a prolonged conflict, drawing German attention for months. If intervention was swift, German forces could stabilize the front and prevent strategic overextension. Yet each option carried risk, and Hitler's patience with Mussolini's recklessness was exhausted. Fury, disbelief, and contempt underpinned every decision. At midday, Hitler convened a smaller council of generals. The discussion focused on troop movements, logistical support, and the timing of interventions. Maps of the Balkans, the Aegean coast, and key passes were analyzed. The generals debated the risks, yet Hitler's authority was absolute. His tone was sharp, cutting off unnecessary speculation, insisting on immediate, precise measures to counter Mussolini's blunder. While the generals deliberated, telegrams from Italian commanders continued to arrive. Italian units were trapped in mountainous gorges under constant Greek assault. Supplies were running low, and morale was deteriorating. Hitler's contempt for Mussolini's leadership intensified. A reckless ally had created a crisis that demanded German resources and attention. He could not ignore the political or military consequences. Private conversations with aides revealed Hitler's disbelief. How could Mussolini act so recklessly, without consultation, and assume the Reich would compensate. The answer, though unspoken, was clear. Mussolini's arrogance, combined with overconfidence in Italian capabilities, had blinded him to the realities of Greek resistance. Hitler, ever precise and calculated, now faced the task of correcting these errors while maintaining the appearance of Axis unity. By afternoon, orders were finalized. German divisions in the Balkans were to move toward northern Greece, reinforcing Italian lines where possible. Luftwaffe reconnaissance missions were authorized, providing intelligence for both ground operations and air support. Contingency plans for full-scale intervention were drafted, though Hitler preferred minimal engagement to preserve forces for broader objectives. Every measure was reactive, a direct response to Mussolini's unauthorized campaign. Hitler's private remarks to close aides were laced with both anger and disbelief. Mussolini assumes we exist to clean up his mistakes. He gambles with our strategy, our forces, and our honor. He will learn the cost of such recklessness. Even as measures were enacted, Hitler's mind calculated the long-term consequences. Greek resistance was unexpectedly determined, terrain advantageous, and the campaign threatened to spiral into prolonged engagement. The need for German intervention was undeniable, yet Hitler's fury at the Italian blunder remained a constant undercurrent, shaping every decision and order. As evening approached, reports indicated that Italian forces had made minimal progress, their positions under continuous attack. German generals prepared to move, yet every step had to be carefully calculated. Hitler understood that Mussolini's unilateral action had forced Germany into a reactive position, undermining months of planning and stretching resources. Shock, disbelief, and contempt remained intertwined with strategic assessment, emphasizing the danger of uncoordinated aggression by an ally. Night fell, and Berlin remained tense. Hitler reviewed dispatches once more, calculated troop movements, and refined contingency plans. The Italian front in Greece was now Germany's problem. Mussolini had acted without foresight, yet the Reich had to act decisively to contain the fallout. Fury, disbelief, and contempt underpinned every decision. The lesson was clear. In World War II, recklessness by an ally could endanger the entire strategic framework, and errors had to be corrected swiftly, ruthlessly, and decisively. The next morning, Berlin was alive with reports from the Balkans. Hitler had barely slept, reviewing telegrams and frontline dispatches with growing intensity. Mussolini's invasion had stalled, his forces trapped in mountainous passes, facing determined Greek resistance. Every report deepened Hitler's disbelief. The arrogance and recklessness of his Italian ally had transformed a minor theater into a pressing crisis. Hitler convened a high-level strategy meeting. Generals, advisors, and staff officers gathered around a vast map table, pins marking Italian positions, Greek strongholds, and potential avenues for German intervention. Hitler's tone was sharp, commanding attention. Mussolini acts without consultation, without strategy, and without regard for consequences. He assumes the Reich will correct his errors. He is mistaken. We will intervene, but we will do so on our terms. The generals nodded, aware of the political and strategic stakes. The Balkan front, previously peripheral, had now become central to German calculations. Hitler's fury was not only personal, it was pragmatic. Uncoordinated Italian action threatened to draw German forces into a protracted campaign at a critical moment in World War II. Every decision had to balance immediate intervention with preservation of broader objectives. Reports from Italian commanders confirmed the worsening situation. Supply lines were cut, morale deteriorating, and Greek forces pressing attacks. Hitler's disbelief was palpable. How could Mussolini act so recklessly, without foresight, in terrain so hostile? The mountains of Greece, rugged and unforgiving, favored defenders who knew the land. Italian troops, poorly equipped and unprepared, struggled to advance. Every telegram reinforced the contempt Hitler felt for Mussolini's blunder. Hitler immediately ordered partial deployment of German forces to northern Greece. Divisions moved to stabilize Italian positions, while Luftwaffe squadrons were tasked with reconnaissance and limited tactical support. Every movement was precise, carefully calculated, minimizing the risk to German forces while compensating for the Italian misadventure. Yet even as he issued orders, Hitler's fury simmered. Mussolini's recklessness had forced Germany into reaction, diverting attention and resources at the worst possible moment. Private meetings with close aides revealed Hitler's inner thoughts, disbelief at the audacity of Mussolini, contempt for his incompetence, and determination to correct the crisis swiftly. Every scenario was analyzed. Greek resistance had proven stronger than anticipated. The geography of the region made Italian progress difficult. The Reich could not allow this campaign to spiral into a long-term drain on resources. Corrective action was urgent. By midday, German divisions began moving toward northern Greece. Engineers prepared roads for supply lines, infantry units coordinated with artillery, and Luftwaffe reconnaissance flights mapped enemy positions. Hitler observed each report with meticulous attention, adjusting strategies based on updated intelligence. His fury remained, tempered by strategic precision. Mussolini had created the crisis, but the Reich would contain it with disciplined calculation. As afternoon arrived, Hitler reviewed intelligence on Greek defensive positions. Mountain passes held by determined Greek troops delayed Italian columns, and Luftwaffe reports indicated limited Italian progress. Hitler's contempt deepened. Mussolini's lack of foresight, his assumption that Italy could achieve swift victory, had endangered not only Italian forces but Germany's broader strategic positioning. Shock, disbelief, and fury remained intertwined in every assessment. Hitler convened another council of generals to discuss intervention strategies. Options were debated. A limited deployment to stabilize Italian lines, increased Luftwaffe support to disrupt Greek positions, and potential direct engagement if Italian forces faltered further. Hitler's voice cut sharply through the discussion. We act not to rescue Mussolini, but to preserve German strategy. His recklessness has created a danger. We will correct it decisively. The generals nodded. Every option carried risk, yet every measure was necessary. The Italian invasion, unilateral and ill-conceived, had placed Germany in a reactive position. Hitler's calculations were precise. Stabilize the front, contain losses, and prevent escalation while maintaining overall strategic advantage. Fury and disbelief remained beneath the surface, driving urgency. Late afternoon brought reports of skirmishes along key mountain passes. Italian troops were exhausted, outmaneuvered, and vulnerable. Greek forces, familiar with the terrain, exploited every advantage. Hitler read each dispatch with mounting frustration. Mussolini had acted without consultation, ignoring logistics, morale, and terrain. His contempt for the Italian leader deepened. Germany was now compelled to intervene, correcting mistakes not of its making. Hitler's private remarks to his aides revealed the mixture of emotion and calculation, recklessness masquerading as initiative. He acts as if the Reich exists to clean up his errors. He will learn the cost. We will stabilize the front, but make no mistake, this is a direct result of his arrogance. Orders were enacted. German troops moved through northern Greece with precision, reinforcing Italian positions, establishing supply lines, and coordinating with Luftwaffe reconnaissance. The aim was stabilization, not conquest. Hitler's fury was now channeled into disciplined action. The crisis demanded resolution, yet every measure underscored Mussolini's reckless blunder. By nightfall, Berlin received updated reports. Italian troops remained stalled but stabilized by German intervention. Greek forces continued to resist, yet the worst-case scenario had been mitigated. Hitler, though still furious, recognized the effectiveness of calculated measures. Disbelief lingered. How could Mussolini act so recklessly? but strategic clarity was now paramount. The Balkan front would not spiral out of control, and German authority remained decisive. Hitler convened his senior staff to review the day's progress. Maps and charts documented troop positions, Italian advances, Greek defensive strongholds, and Luftwaffe reconnaissance data. Every detail was analyzed. The Italian invasion had created a crisis, yet the Reich's response demonstrated efficiency and precision. Fury and contempt for Mussolini persisted, yet the focus on practical action ensured that Germany maintained strategic advantage. Late in the evening, Hitler dictated orders for continued German support of Italian forces, while emphasizing minimal diversion from broader campaigns. His words, though calm in tone, carried unmistakable weight. Correct the errors of our ally, but do not allow their recklessness to dictate German strategy. Greece is a theater of necessity, not choice. We act decisively, efficiently, and on our terms. The night in Berlin was tense, filled with reports, telegrams, and strategy discussions. Hitler's fury, disbelief, and contempt for Mussolini remained intertwined with methodical planning. The Balkan crisis, born of Italian arrogance, had forced Germany into reaction, yet precision and discipline ensured that the Reich maintained control over both the crisis and its broader objectives in World War II. By the next morning, the full weight of Mussolini's blunder had become undeniable. Reports flooded Berlin. Italian troops, exhausted and under constant attack, remained stalled in the mountainous terrain of Greece. Supply lines were disrupted, morale was low, and Greek forces continued to exploit every weakness. Hitler's fury and disbelief remained undiminished, but now they were coupled with the pressing need for decisive action. The Reich could not allow Italian recklessness to derail broader strategy. Hitler convened a high-level strategy session with his senior generals. The room was tense, filled with smoke from cigarettes, the air thick with anticipation. Maps of the Balkans, the Aegean coast, and the northern passes were spread across tables, marked with pins indicating Italian positions, Greek strongholds, and potential German troop movements. Hitler's voice, sharp and commanding, cut through the room. Mussolini's arrogance has placed us in a reactive position. Germany cannot tolerate this. We will stabilize the front, correct his mistakes, and assert control, but we will do so on our terms. The generals listened intently, nodding in agreement. Every recommendation, from partial troop deployments to Luftwaffe reconnaissance, was designed not to rescue Italy, but to safeguard German strategy. Hitler's contempt for Mussolini remained, yet it was now channeled into practical action. The Reich would contain the crisis, but the lesson for the Italian leader was unmistakable. Unilateral action without coordination carried consequences. As German divisions moved toward northern Greece, Hitler monitored progress with meticulous attention. Engineers prepared roads for supply lines through treacherous passes. Infantry units coordinated with artillery, and Luftwaffe squadrons provided reconnaissance and limited tactical support. Every measure was calculated, precise, and disciplined, an explicit contrast to the chaos Mussolini's campaign had created. Disbelief persisted. How could an ally act so recklessly, jeopardizing the Reich's strategic position? Yet efficiency and planning ensured the crisis would be managed. Reports from the front confirmed slow stabilization. Italian troops, bolstered by German intervention, had stopped the retreat, and Greek attacks were partially repelled. Yet Hitler's frustration did not abate. The incompetence of his ally, the arrogance of Mussolini's initiative, and the unnecessary diversion of German resources had created both political and military tension. Every action now carried the dual weight of correcting the front and asserting the Reich's authority. By midday, Hitler reviewed new intelligence. Greek positions were strong, Italian forces weak, and the mountains favored defenders. German planners adjusted troop movements, carefully reinforcing critical points while minimizing risk. Hitler's private remarks to close aides reflected both contempt and controlled fury. Mussolini gambles recklessly, assuming the Reich will rectify his errors. He underestimates the cost of such arrogance. Germany acts not to indulge his ambitions, but to maintain strategic control. Orders were issued. German divisions would continue to reinforce Italian lines. Luftwaffe squadrons would provide reconnaissance and tactical support, and contingency plans were drafted for full-scale intervention if the Italians faltered further. Every measure emphasized precision, control, and discipline, countering the chaos Mussolini had unleashed. In Berlin, Hitler convened another briefing. Officers presented updated reports on troop positions, supply lines, and Greek defensive capabilities. The generals, mindful of Hitler's anger, focused on practical recommendations. Hitler's tone, though measured, was cutting. Control must be maintained. Correct the errors of our ally, stabilize the front, and ensure that German strategy is unimpeded. Mussolini will learn that reckless initiative is intolerable. Afternoon brought new challenges. Reports indicated continued Italian vulnerability, Greek forces pressing attacks, and the logistical difficulties of mountainous terrain. Hitler's disbelief at the magnitude of Mussolini's error persisted. Yet the Reich's response demonstrated the effectiveness of calculated planning. German troops, moving with precision, restored stability to threatened positions, proving that discipline and foresight could overcome even the most reckless actions of an ally. By evening, Berlin received updates that Italian forces, supported by German reinforcements, had achieved partial stabilization. The front was no longer at risk of collapse, though the campaign remained precarious. Hitler's contempt for Mussolini persisted, yet he recognized the value of disciplined intervention. The Reich had preserved strategic advantage, mitigated potential disaster, and reinforced authority within the Axis alliance. Late at night, Hitler reflected on the crisis. Mussolini's invasion had been a reckless gamble, uncoordinated and poorly conceived. The consequences had forced Germany into a reactive position, diverting resources at a critical juncture in World War II. Yet through meticulous planning, decisive action, and disciplined execution, the Reich had contained the fallout. Hitler's fury, disbelief, and contempt had been channeled into effective management, demonstrating the contrast between reckless initiative and calculated strategy. Hitler's private conversation with close aides summarized the lessons of the day. An ally acts without foresight, disregards coordination, and assumes Germany will correct his errors. This is arrogance and incompetence combined. We will intervene, we will correct, and we will assert control. Mussolini will learn the cost of such recklessness. By the following morning, the German intervention had solidified the Italian front. Troop movements were complete, supply lines established, and Luftwaffe reconnaissance ongoing. The crisis, born of Mussolini's unilateral action, had been contained. Hitler's disbelief had transformed into controlled authority. His fury and contempt remained, yet they now underpinned decisive, effective action. The Italian invasion of Greece had reshaped the Balkans, forced Germany into a reactive position, and tested the limits of Axis coordination. Yet Hitler's methodical response ensured that the Reich's strategic objectives remained intact. The political and military lessons were clear. In World War II, recklessness by an ally could create crises, but disciplined, calculated intervention could contain them while reinforcing authority and strategic control.